Hello, good afternoon and welcome to the final webinar in this series of suicide prevention webinars. Thank you for joining us. We're going to talk today about the impact of losing somebody to suicide. We're talking about bereavement by suicide, and Anoushka Clark-Dunn, who works in comms and who has actually been instrumental in these webinars throughout, behind the scenes, sadly lost her father to suicide, and she and I are going to have a conversation around that, and she's going to share some of her experiences with us to help us gain that understanding that we really need to have in order to help us work effectively and support people that have had such a loss in their life. And many of us will have. I just wanted to sort of give it a little bit of context, really. Sadly, in the 4 countries of the United Kingdom, we have around 6,500 deaths by suicide a year. It's a huge amount. It amounts to 1 person every 90 minutes to 2 hours. So it's a very frequent occurrence. Over the years, the research has tried to estimate how many people are affected by each death by suicide, and there's been all sorts of estimates from 6 to over 100. And you know, we can't tell how many people are affected by every death by suicide, but we know that a lot are. And the current sort of thinking in terms of numbers is, well, around 60 people, and that's family and friends and colleagues and acquaintances, people that we don't even know who are affected that may find out on social media or by other ways. So I think what that tells us is that many of us are touched by suicide. And that's why it's important that we talk about it and we understand the impact that it can have on people and also the support that is out there. So these are things that we'll cover this afternoon in our conversation with Anoushka. Another thing that was quite interesting, actually, is there was a report, and we'll put this report next to the recording of today's webinar. It came out last year and it's called From Grief to Hope, and it was a national suicide bereavement survey that had about 7,500 people completing it, people who were affected by the loss of somebody to suicide. And when they looked at that and sort of analysed it, the most frequent relationship that the person had in this survey anyway was friends. And I think what that report reminded us is that we try to make sure we think about families, and obviously in our work context we try to make sure we think about staff and colleagues, but it's really important to remember friends as well. And it just brings home how far-reaching the impact of suicide is. Now, to that end, there will be some people here, of course, who have been affected, may have lost a family member or friend, may have had a patient who's died by suicide, may have had a colleague who's died by suicide. So please take care to make sure that it's okay for you to listen to this interview at this time. And Katrina is going to put a link to the Support After Suicide Partnership in the chat so that you can find out about resources that are there. And as ever, feel free to email me anytime if you want any signposting or have any questions. So just thinking then around suicide, another thing to think about is that of those 6,500 people who die each year, around a quarter to a third of those people are in touch with mental health services at the time of their death or have been in the year before. So again, what that tells us is that most people who end their lives aren't in touch with mental health services at the time of their death. And I guess this is where, Anoushka, I'll bring you in if that's okay, because your father wasn't in touch with mental health services when he died, was he? So.
Hi, Karen. No, he wasn't, unfortunately. It was a very big shock to us when it happened, and very much an unknown when it did occur.
Yeah, but I wonder if you'd be able to sort of share with us maybe your experience and perspectives of the impact this has on individuals and family members.
Yeah, definitely. So when I lost my dad, I was in very much kind of emotional turmoil. I didn't really know which way was up, which way was down. The emotions were all very much linked to my dad's suicide. So everything really triggered it. and it was very difficult to kind of set those emotions apart. I felt very isolated at some points because I didn't really know who to turn to and where I could get the necessary support. Although, you know, there are agencies out there, it's actually taking that first step to get that support and reach out, because actually when you're in such an emotional state, it's actually quite hard to do yourself, especially when you're trying to put together the pieces of the, you know, the death of this, the person that you've lost, and, you know, the loss that you feel from it.
So it sounds like sometimes you're not in a position to reach out for support. So that to me is sounding like we need to be thinking about how we can inreach sometimes to help to offer that support. Is that right? That sometimes we need to make sure that we offer it because people won't be able to look for it?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think it's great if you can reach out to people. You know, you were talking about friends earlier. I think I was in a position where I didn't have a very good relationship with my mum at the time because we were on such difficult emotional states trying to deal with what we'd obviously heard. And every time we'd had a conversation, it would just be so fraught and it felt like it was damaging our relationship further. So to be able to reach out to friends and people around you that, you know, are just as important is a really key factor, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And I guess the other thing I'm thinking about there, and something else that I've heard from other families that I've worked with, is that I guess don't just think about the family as a unit, but think about the individuals within that family, because each person in a family will have their own individual responses as well as there being that wider family response.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, everyone deals with the emotions so differently. Bereavement brings up so many different things for different people, and you just have to allow someone the time to, you know, let them feel those emotions, you know, whether it be anger, whether it be guilt or sadness, for the person they've lost. It's really about giving them time, but also checking in with that person as well, and making them aware that you are available. If, you know, if they ever need anything, or they ever just, you know, want to pick up the phone and just have, you know, a rant on the other end of the phone, or just have a moan, that's the best thing that anyone can do.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important message, because certainly I know that, say, sometimes for clinicians, if we have contact with families when somebody's died by suicide, you know, we're obviously feeling anxious about it. And is it the right time? And I guess it's important for us not to get bogged down with our own anxiety and put that to one side and focus on the family or the individual that we're contacting, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and you know, it is so much about the communication that you have with people, whether that be agencies or friends or family. It, as you said, it might take a little bit of time for those relationships to heal and for that process to be easier for you to talk about, but time has moved on. You know, my relationship with my mum now is a lot better than it was, just because we've both allowed ourselves time to kind of take time to manage the emotions, feel what they're like, and move on from, you know, the loss of my dad.
Anoushka, did you ever pick up a sort of a sense of stigma, for want of a better word, after your father died?
In relation to what do you mean?
I guess people feeling uncomfortable and perhaps avoiding you because they didn't know what to say or because they didn't understand suicide. It's a frightening thing, isn't it? And there's a lot of research out there around stigma, including for people bereaved by suicide, that sometimes they have felt unsupported because friends or acquaintances have given them a wide berth, possibly because they thought it was the right thing to do, but possibly because they just didn't know what to say.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It is so difficult, you know, when you say to someone, you know, you've I mean, as an example, the night that it happened, I rang one of my closest friends and told them, and they just sat in silence on the other end of the phone. Like, what are you supposed to say to someone that's just lost someone through suicide? You know, it's a really raw emotion and a feeling that most people don't experience, thank God. But you know, the few that do, it's so difficult to understand. And I think people really, I think it's great that we can talk about it so much, and I think it's great that we do, but we need to talk about it so much more. It's still something that people don't find comfortable talking about, but I think we should be, because bereavement of any kind is really difficult, and it's a loss for the family and for the individual. But yeah, I think it's such an important thing, to be able to reach out to someone, and you don't even have to talk about the suicide. I think it's just reaching out and asking the person if they're okay, what kind of day they've had, what have they been up to. Those little things make a big difference to someone who is dealing with death by suicide.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I guess that's something about connecting, isn't it? Reconnecting with people is so important in so many ways, including when somebody's, had such a loss. I think one of the things that I learned from somebody that I'll never forget, when we were setting up community-based bereavement support networks specific to suicide, and we were anxious about doing the right thing and the right thing to say. And this was a man who'd lost his son to suicide, and he said, that the worst thing has happened, and you have to, I mean, I'm repeating what I said before, but you have to put your anxiety down and think the worst thing that could happen has happened here. So to make it worse is going to be quite difficult unless you're really, really very, very clumsy, and actually just be brave enough and bold enough to be there, even if you are open about the fact you don't know what to say, but you're there.
Yeah, it's just having someone there, I think, is the most important part. You definitely get better days and your worst days, but having someone that you can just reach out to and just communicate with, emotions are different for everyone in regards to suicide. It's never a clear-cut way of how you're going to manage them, and no one knows how they're going to feel as well. For me, when I was trying to manage my dad's suicide, I used to bundle all my emotions up into a little ball in like the middle of my chest, and they just used to explode out of me because I didn't know what I felt, what was going on. I had no control over it, and only after a certain amount of time and therapy as well, I managed to pull those different emotions apart and find a kind of more peaceful, happier place for me to manage those emotions in a more content way.
Yeah, and I guess everybody will have their own timeline, won't they?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just thinking, so in ways it's try not to be too anxious about what to say, just be there with somebody, reach out. But are there things that we should make sure we don't say, Anoushka? Do you have any advice for us about what might not be helpful?
Personally, I don't like the saying time is a healer. I think for someone who's just experienced suicide, and to hear them say that, this is obviously very personal to me, it didn't really help me. It just felt like it was just going to be such a long process for me. And I don't actually think time is a healer. I think time does help, but you never get over what has happened. And it's very much about managing and moving forward with your life in a productive way. They're never, all the emotions that are attached to my dad still sit with me. I can remember that night like it was yesterday. None of that has gone away. I've just dealt with it and managed to hopefully move on and make myself in a more happier frame of mind and positive as well. you know, I feel like I've moved so much further along.
And in terms of what helped you, you've mentioned a few things. You've mentioned friends and you've mentioned therapy.
Mm-hmm.
What else has been helpful for you?
So I actually rang some helplines quite early on in the process. I think it was maybe a couple of weeks. And it was when I was at some of my lowest points. So I was just kind of sitting in my room thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Like, it's just so difficult. And I just thought, I haven't really got anyone else to talk to right this second, because it was quite late in the day, and you know, people have lives to live, and you kind of think you don't want to interfere on their life. So I rang one of these helplines and I spoke to them about everything I'd been feeling and what had been going on for me, and also how it all happened. And they just sat there and listened to everything that I had to say. And they took all the emotion that I had with it as well. And it was just, it felt like a weight had come off my shoulders, only a slight weight, but it was just something that meant that someone was there for me. You know, I didn't know that person. I didn't have any idea who they were. I didn't know anything about them, but they were there at the other end of the phone. They just listened. They just took the time to appreciate what I had gone through, and that meant so much.
It's very powerful, isn't it? Listening.
Yeah, it's such a key. Yeah, it's such a key thing. And even with friends and family as well, I think just to be able to listen to someone, and you know, that is the most important thing, especially when they've been through something as traumatic as a death by suicide.
And I guess similar to listening and talking, I know that there are various groups for people bereaved by suicide. So in our locality, for example, in Buckinghamshire, we have a survivors of bereavement by suicide group that's facilitated by Jeff, who lost his wife to suicide some years ago. So they're a peer support organisation. And in Aylesbury, it's slightly different, and Cruz runs a group for people bereaved by suicide. Is that something that you ever tried? And if you did, was it helpful? Or if not, why might some people not choose to go down that route?
Yeah, they were made available to me, those groups, and Pete, you know, when I went to the GP to talk about my depression, he said that, you know, you can access these groups. They're really great. But actually, it's not something I did. I personally didn't. I think for most people, it's probably the emotion that's attached to it, to be actually able to sit in a room with other people and hold on to all the emotions that are attached to the suicide and then talk about it. I think that's what I really struggled with. And because I didn't feel very in control of those emotions, I don't think I would have wanted to go into a space like that. I'm sure it would have been very safe, but I didn't feel ready to explore it in that way. That's why I decided to go into personal therapy, because it meant that I was in a room by myself with someone else, but I wasn't with other people. I don't think I could have also heard about other people's experiences as well. I think that might have just tipped me over the edge a little bit, because it is such the emotion that you deal with, they are so raw and they're so real, that it's really difficult to comprehend when, you know, so early in that process of managing it.
Yeah, of course. And I guess we're all individual, and everybody's going to have different needs, aren't they? So there's no one size fits all. And there needs to be a number of different forms of support, I guess. Because certainly some people that I've worked with who haven't wanted to do the groups have said exactly the same as you, that they felt a need to contain their emotions when with other people, or could only freely let them go when they were only with one person. But like you say, hearing other people's stories can be very difficult, and when you're dealing with everything that you've already got, it's not necessarily right for everybody.
Yeah.
So what do you think about organisations that offer individual support specifically for people who have lost somebody to suicide? I guess the reason I'm asking is there's a real national driver for this, and so now in Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire we've got we've got that facility. So in Buckinghamshire, through Mind, there's a support for people bereaved by suicide service that actually has only run virtually because it started in the pandemic, but the ultimate aim is that there'll be face-to-face, some practical support, some emotional support. And in Oxfordshire, Crews can offer that as a sort of in addition to what they already do, they have a quicker response, I think, when it's been somebody bereaved by suicide. Is that something that you think would be helpful, or do you, in your experience, was a different kind of therapy more helpful for you?
I've actually tried 2 different types of therapy. So when I went to the GP, they said that the waiting times for therapy was quite long. So I actually decided to go ahead and book my own therapy. I think I maybe would have accessed more groups, possibly further down the line, but for me, just the timing wasn't quite right. You know, I think, yeah, I mean, I was working full time and it didn't really work. And there were lots of other things going on as well. So it just didn't really fit in with the kind of lifestyle that was going on at that time. But actually, I think it maybe would have been quite beneficial reaching out to other organisations, because I know that there are so many more out there that do such great things and great work. And just to be a part of it, I think, is a really important factor.
Yeah, yeah. And how did you sort of get through that, you know, the first few weeks and months? That must have, were you at work then, or were you off work at that point? You still went?
I actually had a few days off work and then I went straight back into work, because I was one of those people that when my mind is more active on, you know, day-to-day work, actually I'm not as affected and my emotions don't overrule me, and I feel like I'm more in control of what's going on. I did feel like I was in a little world of my own, like a little bubble, because I don't really remember a lot of what happened in the few weeks and few months after it. I actually went on holiday and I look back at the photos and I think, no, just the realization that I was there, but I don't really remember it, if that makes sense. I think it's such a strange experience, and for me it takes you so out of yourself. You know, I thought I was in a really good place with everything in my life, and when someone rips themselves apart from you like that with my dad, it just pulls your world apart, and that's what it did for me. So yeah, I just think, yeah, I don't really think there's a word for how I felt. It was very unstable. I said to you before that my emotions were just like a little ball of energy, and that's exactly what it felt like. I didn't really have control over them, and when I had a bad day, I had a bad day, and I just had to let it happen, really. It was all part of the process of me moving forward with, you know, dealing with his death and seeing how I could just make the changes to be able to manage it and live with the fact that he'd taken his own life.
And I guess that's probably a lifelong journey, is it? Is it still a journey?
Yeah, I think so. I think because you never ever get answers from what happened, you know, there's always unknowns about what has occurred and, you know, what Dad was feeling before, you know, he decided to take his own life. I think that just stays with you. I feel like there is a small hole in my body where my dad would be, but now there's a gap there and it will never be filled again. But over time, I think it gradually, for me, gets smaller because I'm learning to cope with it more and learning to manage how to live without him in my life.
Yeah. Questions that's being left with those questions is it must be really difficult because you can't get the answers that perhaps at times you want. And I know from my experiences of working with people who are bereaved, that seems to be the most common thing that people talk about is these questions. And so then they have questions themselves and they can't get answers to those questions. And that what people have said to me is they feel in their experience that's what sets losing someone to suicide apart from other bereavements. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I have so many questions that I'd love to put to my dad now. And the problem is you start making assumptions as well, because you start piecing together where things might have gone wrong, or, you know, all the things that might have happened prior to his death. And, you know, you just have to live with the fact that you're never going to get those answered. And however hard it is, it's just, there are no words for it really. It's just such a raw and emotional thing to be able to manage. And yeah, that's all I can say about it really.
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts about what we can do as clinicians or friends or colleagues if we're supporting somebody who has been bereaved by suicide and has lots of questions? Do you have any advice for how we can support people with those unanswered questions?
I don't think so, but I think it's allowing the patient or the person that you're helping to allow them to explore that in their own time. I think as you go on through the process, you start making less assumptions and you start kind of conjuring up less questions in your head, and you just manage it and you just move forward with it. And I think it's allowing the person that time to reflect on what's happened and to explore how it feels for them, and then, you know, move forward from it. I think trying to highlight positive things that have happened after the event is a really key thing as well, because there is so much emotion attached to the suicide itself. It's really hard to notice when things go right for people, and, you know, when you do something right. Actually, when someone realizes that you've done something well and they can recognize that and just spin it as a positive, it makes a massive difference to someone's mental well-being. I know it did for me. You know, at the time I was working quite hard and there were deadlines to meet, and it really felt like I was on a really difficult path, you know, because I was trying to manage the emotions of the suicide and I was trying to manage work commitments as well. And just to have someone there to go, actually, you're doing a great job, you know, don't worry, you know, you will manage it. It's just a little glimmer of light and actually something that's quite dark to deal with. And personally, for me, things like that make a massive difference. And as I said before, just talking to people and just checking in with people just to see how they're doing every single day makes the world of difference.
I'm kind of thinking about, it sounds as though it's important to be in the here and now with people and not only focus on what's happened, but stay with them in all of the other aspects of the here and now. I guess to help that sort of keep a connection with around you. Yeah, okay, thank you. Anoushka, I know that your father wasn't in touch with services, but I guess I'm just after your opinion on how we might be able to deal with some of the anxiety that we have. I know that one lady I worked with said to me that, you know, when you're talking to families after they've lost somebody, of course they're going to be angry. And in all likelihood, if you're contacting us, you're going to bear the brunt of a lot of that anger. And it might be to do with you or your service, or it might not be, but you have to just suck it up. You have to find a way of sucking it up, because that's what I need you to do right now, in that here and now, by being with me. And it's something I've never forgotten, really, just particularly those words of sucking it up. And I just wondered what your thoughts are, or whether you have any perspective on that.
Yeah, what you mean with people contacting you when taking the brunt of all the emotion that's attached to it. Yeah, definitely. I can imagine how difficult it would be for clinicians to speak to someone that's dealt with a death by suicide. But I also think it's maybe finding a way that suits the patient as well. You know, not everyone wants a phone call. You know, maybe they don't want to talk on the phone. Maybe it's about reaching out by email or text message, or, you know, we're so much into social media nowadays. Is that a route that we can look at to try and reach out to people? Because there are so many ways that we can communicate with people that actually don't make people feel so vulnerable or so angry about the situation. You know, I don't know how I would have felt if someone had called me up and said, "How are you feeling?" You know, they would have either got a very angry person, or they would have got floods of tears. You just don't know how you're going to be from day to day. So I think trying to find an angle that works for the patient, but also being patient with that person as well, and realizing that the process may take some time for them to sort of sort out in their own head. It is a long process. It never goes away. It gets easier, but just knowing that is really key. And it's also not letting, as a clinician, not letting yourself be affected, and that's really hard to say, by what you hear on the other end of the phone, because, as I said before, there is a lot of emotion attached to it, and that could all be coming down on you as the clinician. So yeah, it's a very tricky situation, but I think definitely finding suitable ways to communicate with people, which people feel more happier with, is definitely the way forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's why it reinforces the need for clinical supervision and colleague, you know, getting support from colleagues if you are a clinician in that position, to make sure that you manage the emotions that you're left with, so that you can be available for the next person or the next patient. And that's so essential, really. I guess another thing that I've learned is around you said about being patient, and yes, we need to be really patient and also mindful that we might need to go through what we've just talked about again with people. If it's information that we want to give families or relatives, or if it's responding to questions from families or relatives, we may feel that we've responded to them before, but we may have to respond to them a number of times before actually it sinks in, if you like, our response is heard.
Yeah, definitely. And also that it starts to make sense as well, because you know, you can hear something quite early on in the process. When I first went to my GP, and I just got given so much information, and actually a few days afterwards I kind of went away and I thought, I don't know how much of that was actually beneficial for me. And yeah, it really is definitely about the patient side of it, but also being aware that you might have to repeat the same things again, but not letting that deter you from supporting that person. Like, that's all part of the process of them trying to manage and move forward with dealing with the suicide.
Yeah, and I think it's back to that checking in that you talked about. Perhaps it's better to give small amounts of information each time you check in rather than a colossal amount at the beginning, and thinking about our motives for giving so much information. Is it, why are we doing that? Because we feel, you know, just so sad that this has happened. You know, I wonder whether sometimes there's a motive of giving as much information because of recognition of that sadness, but that might not be the most helpful thing to do. Sometimes it's better to be practical and take it step by step, maybe.
Yeah. And I think it's also good to be able to maybe ask the person what they're expecting from the experience, that, you know, as a mental health trust, maybe that's what we should be doing. You know, when we're going to support people who have lost someone by suicide, you know, what do they want? What would they find beneficial? It's asking those kind of questions, and I don't think they're always going to know the answer straight off, but maybe breaking that up through the process and trying to find out where the key areas are where you can support them more. I think that's a really important thing as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I can't believe it's the time it is. It's been really, you know, thank you, Anoushka. It's been enlightening and really helpful to hear your experiences and your views. You know, we can't underestimate how, or overestimate, whichever one it is, but it's so helpful. And always we will hear from people. That was the most helpful thing, is to hear from people that have had experience. And the comments in the chat box here are saying thank you and recognising the importance of hearing personal stories. There's a few questions. Do you mind if I pass a couple to you, Anoushka? There's one saying, we talked about what was unhelpful, and that sometimes there's no definite right or wrong about what to say to people. But there is someone here that said, you know, what do you feel would be helpful for us to say? I guess this is around maybe when we first see somebody after they've lost somebody. Yeah.
I think it's not highlighting too much on the fact that they've lost someone by suicide. I think it's just recognising them as the individual, and just getting to know more about them. You know, very much you don't want to link to the suicide so much. You almost want to draw yourself away from it. So anything that helps to take your mind off it, I think is a good thing. And just, you know, finding out about someone and what they like, their hobbies, their interests, it's just going to move them away from all those thoughts that they have, and that are linked to the suicide. I think that's a really key thing to do.
Yeah, I guess I wonder if there might be other times when, if you wanted to talk about it, I suppose that's about the sitting alongside. If actually someone does just want to talk about it, then you need to to remain there and be able to listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's back to what you're saying. What does the person want? Pick up the vibes of what the person needs or wants at that moment in time.
Yeah, and just also be open to the fact that they, you know, when they are ready to talk about it, let them talk about it. Don't feel like they have to be pushed into it, because that's not going to help the process, and actually it might affect their mental well-being more, you know, in the long term.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Again, it's very one size doesn't fit all, individual. There's one here, you've made a really good point about listening. Mostly we're anxious about saying the right things, but so often I've heard that it's what we are able to receive, to really listen, which supports, which echoes what you're saying, just summarises it really nicely. Is there a place for medication to managing the process? I've had some GPs prescribing anxiolytics as part of the treatment for managing bereavement, especially death by suicide. I guess for some people that might be something that's helpful in the early stages.
Yeah, it's personally something I did try, but I couldn't get on with it. I felt like I'd turned my emotion switched off inside me, and I couldn't tap into, if I was happy, sad, guilt, I couldn't tap into any of it. So for me, that personally didn't work, but I know that depression does come along with suicide in most cases, because there is so much emotion attached to it. So I know that it's beneficial for people, but I think I don't think you want to be doing that long term. I think it's a much healthier way if you can try and manage it yourself, regardless of how long it takes. That's personally what worked for me. But as I said, you know, one doesn't fit all, so it may be completely different for someone else, especially if there's lots of other things that are going on for that person as well that they're trying to manage.
Yeah, of course. And I guess probably just time for one more. This is a work-related one. Was there a place for your manager to offer you support during supervision or informal chats, was one question. And then a follow-up one was, or would you have rathered not mentioning it at all? So I think this is about the support that you got in the workplace from your manager.
Yeah, so at the time I actually found it quite difficult to approach my manager about it. They knew about it because I obviously had a duty to tell them, because I didn't want to come into work and be very emotional and just kind of walk out when I needed air and things like that. So they were aware of it, but I think personally they didn't know how to deal with it. So they found it very challenging when I would come into the office and just say, I need to go outside, I need to get some fresh air, you know, I'm not in a good headspace. I don't really think they could comprehend what was going on. So it would have been nice to get some more support with it, but I don't know what kind of support I would have expected. And also at the time, I was working in a different environment from what I am now. So maybe the environment wasn't quite right for me to be able to explore that safely, those emotions.
Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it, about that whole sort of the wider organisational culture, maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll put some resources with the recording of this webinar, and one of them is a document called Finding the Words, and that was developed based on research with not with people who are bereaved by suicide, but people who know, love or support people who are bereaved by suicide. And it aims to help people think about how to respond, or, you know, just supporting people in being there, and particularly in the workplace, maybe, where we can struggle with knowing what to say. So we'll put that resource and a number of other resources with the recording. And I guess it's important to say as well that Campaign Against Living Miserably, CALM, is a really excellent male suicide prevention charity that supports men who are struggling with suicidal thoughts. It supports people who are bereaved by suicide. And Anoushka, you're doing an abseil to fundraise for Calm. Where's that?
So it will be in Portsmouth, down the Spinnaker Tower. This will be third time lucky, so it's already been unfortunately cancelled twice already. So yeah, come the 27th of June, I will be abseiling down the Spinnaker Tower.
Brilliant, thank you. And we have put a link to Anoushka's fundraising page in case anybody would like to support her great feat, abseiling down a tower, which is brilliant. Anoushka, thank you so much for sharing your experiences so openly and for answering so many questions. And thank you everybody for joining us as well. This is the last in the series of regular webinars, but we will be putting on a webinar every other month, I think, going forward. And so we're keen to hear, we've had a couple of people give suggestions for future webinars, and we are really keen to hear more suggestions. So please do let us know what you'd like us to focus on. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.